Should we do a quick the Marvel's box office watch to see what the current tallies are?
Just to cheer everybody up after that discussion about Doctor Who.
It's currently sitting at 187.8 million worldwide. The domestic is 77.5 million, and the international gross is 110 million. And that is it. It's probably not even going to get to 100 million domestic.
Like that recent Monday is the funny one to me.
Get it done.
Monday it made a whopping $339,000 at the box office. Tuesday, 495,000. So it's going up. It's going up.
Do we have how much per cinema? Those are always fun.
Oh, they are fun. You can actually average them out to see how many people are sitting
on Monday. The average per
screening.
On Monday, the average per cinema was $110.
Well done. Good job, Disney. Excellent.
There's like 4 tickets.
That's insane. It's funny. We find it so funny, but like it's exactly as we expected it to go. Kind of like
it's worse. Like, yeah, I mean, did anyone expect it to be like this low? Because
from what I gathered,
no.
We had predictions running from the past 2 years, and none of us went this low. I think
Waller was probably the lowest. Actually, he said 350, and I laughed at him. Said, "No, never go that low."
Is it currently on track to be the biggest box office bomb of all time?
It might be relative to budget, yes. So
it'll be up there, yeah.
I think not even. It's dubious at this point. I assume it will hit 200 million, but it potentially might not.
Didn't Mortal Engines have a record at one point, or did The Flash beat that? Because that was an expensive movie.
I imagine
The Flash was expensive, but I think its tally wasn't as bad as this.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure I read that the Marvels is worse, much worse.
Yeah, this is worse than The Flash. I'm just not sure about Mortal Engines, whatever that got.
Yeah, I just remember Mortal Engines being one of the biggest ones of all time.
They're interesting because this kind of ties into a recent statement that Bob Iger made regarding the Marvels, actually. Apparently, it suffered from a lack of supervision on the set.
I really hate this.
It needed more studio interference. That was the problem.
It is the idea.
48 edits weren't enough. They needed to do 58 edits. That would have saved it.
This gets even better, right? Let's spin the wheel of excuses and see where we end up. Because this time around, it's... So Disney CEO Bob Iger said at the New York Times DealBook Summit, following the Marvels flopping at the box office, that there was a lack of supervision on the set as a result of the COVID pandemic. Because we're still blaming things on COVID, I guess. And I think Donald Trump is probably in there somewhere as well.
Probably.
As a reason why it failed.
You just want to have like a camera on him, but he's almost sad and like he's unshaven, got a bottle of alcohol. He just goes, "It was shit, okay? It was shit. I know it was shit. You know it was shit."
No, but he took it over. Like he was the one that fired the previous guy, took it over. I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna save everything." You know that he saw himself as like riding in on cavalry horseback to save Disney from the previous guy, and he's like, "No, actually, no, I'm gonna have to throw that guy under the bus." And that, like, he's still doing that, but that guy is only going to throw under the bus for so long before you actually have to take the repercussions of your own actions. The idea, like, the simple idea that you think a movie can be saved by oversight, do you even understand how stupid that is? Like, these writers will write something that is absolutely horrendous that no one will want to watch, but then an executive somewhere will come in and just go, "By the way, if you change these 5 things, then everyone will love it." Like, no, obviously an executive can't save a terrible movie. The person that needs to be fired is the people writing the movie, the people directing the movie, and anybody who hired the writers and directors of the pissing movie that sucks so hard that no amount of executive oversight would save it. And yet,
I mean, I would posit to you that it is theoretically possible an executive could look at a failing project and say, "Nope, we've got the wrong people attached to this one. We do need to interfere, and we're going to change things up. We're going to get a different director, or we're going to get different writers in to fix it." Like, I think Ike Perlmutter apparently was quite useful in that regard of keeping the MCU on track and finding the right people to direct their movies. So it can theoretically work. It's just that, yeah. As a general principle, I would agree. Studio executives are not creatives, and so they're not the right people to direct the course of a movie.
If those people could entirely write what was created before them and just immediately just go, "This is all trash, I need to start from scratch," then yes, because it's essentially you beginning from their own creation. But from everything that I've heard, the way these movies are written is you get hired to do a specific thing, and everything else is already set in stone. And so you have to write towards an action scene, or you have to write towards this. And so nobody actually has entire creative control. Everybody's trying to fill in the gaps for somebody else that's already planned something else. It's a bit on a conveyor belt. I don't think that works at all. And I think when it comes to this entire creative thing is, look, the amount of times I've seen somebody create a terrible movie, and at this moment specifically, I'm thinking of Taika Waititi, and then just gets promoted to something else, despite the fact that he's created failures beforehand, is so astronomical that nobody in Hollywood seems to care about somebody else's prior record.
Yeah, I guess that's probably the point. Is that I'm not of the school of thought that says that studio interference and things can never save a movie. But if the studio and the executive had made the right decision in the first place, they wouldn't be in a position where they need to make more interventions to make the film work. There are interviews now finally starting to come out for the Marvels, because I'm still working on my video for that one. So you can now find Nia DaCosta, for example, talking to, I think it was Collider, and being asked which her favorite of all the MCU films was, or which one inspired the Marvels. And the one she said that was one of the best MCU films, Iron Man 3. And if I'm hiring someone and I'm sitting there and I would ask them as like Bob Iger or whoever's in charge of Marvel, I'd say, what was your favorite Marvel film? And if someone told me Iron Man 3, I would not be giving them the job.
Do you think she even watched Iron Man 3? Or was it just like, let's just name a movie?
She said it influenced it in practical effects terms as well, because that effect when they have the fire under the skin. And apparently she spoke to the director about how that worked.
I feel bad for all the Iron Man 3 fans in chat right now. There's a few of them, you know.
I love them! No, that makes me like the Marvels more!
There was a very telling interview where she talked about making that film and straight up said there would be scenes that we were shooting where I had no fucking clue what it was supposed to be or what was happening. And I just thought, what a revealing remark from the director of the movie.
Well, that'd be in line with everything else we've seen, right? Like
as Gary said, like they're not hired so much as they're cast in the role of director, but they don't actually do anything. You know, they're just there to oversee this project, this machine that's already up and running when they get there.
They can
as well. She was one of the writers. They had 3 writers on this, and Nia DaCosta was one of them. So she did have some creative control. It's not like she just showed up and was presented with a script. Yeah, she was a director, and she also was one of 3 writers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
so she did have quite a bit of creative control.
Great control, you would say.
Yeah.
I imagine like being in the shoes of someone like Chloe Zhao. It's like, hey, I just made this movie on a budget of like $50 about a woman who drives around in a van and talks to people. You know, won an Oscar. I'm pretty happy about that. Okay, what am I doing next? Right, I'm in charge of like a $250 million ensemble cast action superhero movie.
Provided me
what the fuck am I even supposed to be doing here?
Yeah.
I mean, when they made Thor, they brought in Kenneth Branagh, who had done dozens of movies by that stage, and he directed a lot of very well-regarded stuff. He'd done all his Shakespeare stuff by that stage. So that makes sense. So you go from Kenneth Branagh, who's basically a genius, right? And now you're hiring Nia DaCosta. Like, what? How do you go from Kenneth Branagh to Nia DaCosta, a woman who has 2 crappy, low-budget indie movies behind her, on a $250 million movie? Like, it's absolute insanity. Talk about executive oversight. Why did no one say, no, we can't have this woman directing this? She doesn't have the experience. It's just nuts.
For Captain America, it was Joe Johnston, who made The Rocketeer. Like, let's not forget that.
Nice.
Then you got, obviously, Kenneth Branagh. I don't think anyone needs to go over all of those films. Jon Favreau, perfectly established. Certainly, that was like one of his high points for his career, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of like stuff he was making. And then Avengers getting Joss Whedon. It's like, it almost seems like they're hiring people on their experience and their ability to do these projects going forward. That's interesting. I wonder what happened. That completely got annihilated by the time we reached like the transition from phase 3 to 4.
That is, yeah, that is not the criteria by which they hire creatives. You know, it's not down to experience and skill and ability. It's other things that you're born with, you might say. I was going to say is like all of this feeds into the result that we've had recently that Disney are now on track to lose $750 million across 13 films this year in historic year of box office flops. 13 movies. I think only 2 of them have actually turned a profit out of all of this. Yeah, I'm just looking through their lineup of films this year.
The Guardians 3, that made a profit, didn't it? And
that made it, well, marginal, not huge, but I yeah.
What was the other one?
I'm just reading through the list here. So let's see. Yeah, so Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania had a deficit of 37 million apparently, so not good. Guardians of the Galaxy 98 million. Little Mermaid, that lost 40. Boogeyman lost 14. Elemental lost a couple of million. Oof, Indiana Jones lost 158 million. Haunted Mansion lost 140 million. The Creator lost money as well, actually.
Quite a miserable centennial for Disney.
How bad is it that we consider breaking even a success? Like, that's really, well, when you make these movies, you expect to like at least double your money, like preferably.
If you're going to put in like 250 million, yeah, you're going to expect some pretty major profits because that's a huge gamble.
Opportunity cost, right? You spend all this time, effort, connections, networking to create something that only makes that much money. That's absurd. That's terrible.
Yeah. And it's not just that, like, you would have rejected lots of other projects before you got to the project you decided to put your money into.
Oh, 100%. And like, it is a case of, yes, not everything you invest in makes money. And so some things will be a success, it will be a failure. But when everything in Disney you're investing in is a failure, that just becomes then a point where you will never invest anything in the future. There will become a point where,
well, obviously that's why their stock price is dropping.
Well, exactly. Yeah. This is just a no-go at this point.
Yeah, I mean, losing $750 million in a year is crushing because Disney doesn't have that much money to throw away on stuff like this. And so when they have a whole year of deficits, that's not something they can easily bounce back from. You know, a company the size of Amazon could absorb that kind of loss. Disney can't.
They can't even like break glass in case of emergency because all of what they did this year could be considered breaking glass in case of emergency. A lot of it, anyway.
Well, they've still got bringing back Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man.
Well, that plus Avengers is their last move for the MCU. Like, that's all they've got left.
Amazon is that there's. Go ahead.
Amazon's break glass is like just their normal retail business that will always keep going. They can expand it as much as they want. They can expand it into other countries. Yeah. And so it doesn't really matter what they do with their entertainment business. It will always just be, it's like a side gig for them. Whereas Disney, you can argue that their parks are what have made the money as much as you want, but their parks are linked to the success of their other IPs. And so if their other IPs are not a success, their parks will eventually die. And
this is always the argument of when Star Wars becomes a brand much more focused on selling toys than making films, without realizing that it's only because the films were popular that the toys were popular to begin with.
Yes.
You do actually need to create an actual IP that causes people to want to go and experience that in practical terms, which Disney isn't doing anymore. But this is a long-term failure of strategy, and it can't be blamed. It can entirely be blamed on Bob Iger. It can't really be blamed on Chapek, because the whole MO seems to have been, we will buy up as many recognizable IPs as possible, and this will produce immense amounts of money for us, because, you know, a sequel to Star Wars, a sequel to Indiana Jones, a sequel to whatever you care to name, everyone knows these franchises. Our long-term future is dependent on us making money off of sequels. And now Bob Iger comes out and says, maybe we made too many sequels. But if you had competent writers, there's no such thing as too many Star Wars sequels. You're talking about Star Wars, not Cars. But apparently, no, we can't even make one Star Wars sequel that's good would be good enough. But he says they've made too many of them now. And they're going to focus on quality over quantity, which is just a tacit, not even very tacit admission that they've been churning out immense amounts of shit. And now they're going to try and make a good film for a change.
Well, he says, there's a quote from him here, actually, where he says, I don't want to apologize for making sequels. Some of them have done extraordinarily well, and they've been good films, too. I think there has to be a reason to make them, though, and you have to have a good story. That's probably what they lacked. And often the story doesn't hold up to or is not as strong as the original story. That can be a problem. It's their strategy, right, of buying up IPs and extending them by just making sequels or remakes of originals. It's a short-term win. it's something that allows you to generate quite a lot of hype and quite a lot of interest in the short term, but you burn through the goodwill very, very quickly by doing that. And you can see what they've done with it. It's definitely happened with Star Wars, and now it's kind of getting to that point where Marvel is just referencing itself, and like none of the new stuff that they're trying to launch is working. They're now looking back towards resurrecting old characters and so on. It's all short-term wins to just try and get by. There's no long-term plan there. And the problem that it creates then is that you don't put any effort into creating new stories. There used to be a time when Disney was quite innovative about telling new stories, creating new characters. Their animated movies were awesome stuff. And they don't do that anymore because none of the stuff that they're coming up with now is resonating with people. And the endless live-action remakes are now hitting rocky ground because, you know, look at what's happening with Little Mermaid, and then to a much greater extent, something like Snow White. People are getting sick of that as well.